if you want to go learn how to train gerbils or basset hounds.
Evolves from the way you train the dog. So when the dog works, it's only an extension of the way you taught it. Just like when you use hand signals.
Some say these two trainers were quietly in the shadows. Robert Weatherwax, last of the legendary Lassie trainers, from the world's greatest movie dog training family, was quietly hidden in his TV work. And Christophe, Clugston elite action canine trainer, was traveling from the sub-zero Arctic to the sweltering jungle heat training dogs on 3 continents. But a chance meeting changed all of that. Now, Robert and Christophe have joined forces and they're breaking the silence. For the first time, the secretive and hidden world of the movie dog trainer and the science of the elite tactical trainer will be revealed. That's right, they are out of the shadows. Welcome to Tactical Practical.
Back again! It's the greatest podcast about canines and dogs you'll ever run into. And this time around, we're going to be answering questions that we've gotten over the months. And of course, we can't answer every question and we can't do personalized questions. So we're just going to do the generic questions. We narrowed it down, or I narrowed it down to 5 of the most prevalent questions that I've gotten from people in emails and texts and on comments even. And I'm going to answer them. I'm going to go through the 5 questions. I'll tell you what the question is, and obviously, and then I'll answer it. And then after I get done, Robert will tell you his answers. So get ready, everyone. This is going to be a shocker, maybe. And it should keep you titillated and watching. Alert everyone in your family. Tell your dog to get near the computer. He'll want to hear this too, or she'll want to hear this too. All right, so I need to put on the glasses to read. Don't get shocked, everyone. And the first question is, how did you get into dog training? Okay, well, I think I've said a little bit about that, but I'll describe it. I got into dog training because I really wanted to be a big cat trainer. I wanted to work with tigers and lions, mountain lions, leopards, jaguars. Obviously, you can't just do that. There's not a lot of places you can run into that or get that. Gunther Gable Williams was my idol during that period of time. And I figured, well, house cats. Yeah, I started training house cats. But dogs seem to be the way to get into the business and get known and then move into the big cats. That was my plan, at least. So I got into dog training by watching certain movie dog trainers. And again, as I've said many times, my 2 big mentors were movie dog, obedience, and protection. They did protection dogs, and they had both been in the military. Actually, one of them created the West Coast military doctrine that they used for all training back in World War II. And so I got inspired, and then I got really enamored with Dobermans and all sorts of things, and Run Joe Run, which is something Robert's dad worked on, and also our mentor worked on. Carl worked on that, then Robert's dad worked on that program. So I was influenced indirectly by Robert's dad, too. It's kind of strange. But anyway, that's how I got into dog training. I just did it. It was great. I had a German Short-haired Pointer. I trained that dog to do a great bunch of things. And then from there, and then when I went to the university, I learned the behavioral sciences, and I trained rats and cats to do all sorts of bizarre stuff. And then I went back to dog training. So that's my answer for that. So that was my first answer. Number 2, what was your biggest achievement with dogs? Yeah, see, now that's difficult for me to really come to what could be the biggest thing. But I'll just use a recent one because it's on YouTube. And that's actually to teach my American Bulldog, who's a monster. At this point, he's 120 pounds. I hope we don't get any further above that. He's a monster. He's 120 pounds. But I've taught him not only how to limp on one side, he can limp on both sides, and I got him switching. He can do the switch limp now, which is nobody's done it. I'm waiting for Omar von Mueller to accept the challenge because it's not just limping now, brother. You got to do the switch limping, and let's just face it, there isn't anybody else who's trained a dog that big there's any video of. So that's my biggest achievement with dogs currently. That's what I'll say. Okay, so number 3. what's the biggest mistake dog trainers make? Man, there's so many answers to that. And I'm going to go with one that probably you won't hear from mainstream people, and that is that they don't know enough about canines. They don't know enough about dogs. They need to learn about dogs, not training, not, oh, this is a Springer Spaniel or this is a Basset Hound. We always talk about Basset Hounds in our podcast. You'll see that it's a recurring theme. But you need to know about wolves. You need yeah, we'll bring up Basset Hounds again, so pay attention. So you need to know about wolves. You need to know about foxes. You need to know about jackals. You need to know about the wild dogs. You need to know really the dingo. Dingoes were actually domesticated dogs, and then became feral, and then became wild again. There's all these things because you got to understand the whole brain set, the psychology of canines, and then you can get individual. Because I've read books. I was reading a book the other day that said all dogs were bred for. It's like, that's wrong. They weren't all man created. They weren't all artificially created. So most people, and that proves my point, they don't know about canines, because I have a jungle dog. The dog was not artificially bred. No human was involved in his background whatsoever. So I bring that up because if you really want to know about dogs, you really want to be a great trainer, not just an average, not a little leaguer, not a struggling sit-stay trainer, as we say. You really want to be a great trainer, you really got to know dogs, canines, all of them. And if you can train a domesticated dog, you can train a coyote, because they're pretty close. I'll put that out there for people to think about. Okay. Number 4, what was the best advice you were given for dogs? Okay. And that will kind of tie into my last answer. And this was something that both of my mentors told me. They told me to learn as much about all forms of dog training as I possibly could. They weren't narrow. They weren't stuck in a niche. They told me that there are things you can learn from other trainers. Because I asked one of them at one point, how do you do this with hunting dogs? And he said, I don't know. I don't do stuff with hunting dogs, but you should look in this direction, look at that direction, find people who know about hunting dogs and learn that. And I was doing the same thing with sled dogs too at the same time. See, I was really young when all this was transpiring. I was like 14 through 18. I was doing a massive amount of learning different types of dog training. And then of course after that, but that time period was incredibly important to me as far as getting new inputs into what was incredibly important. Okay, so we go to number 5. The question is, living or dead, who's a dog trainer you never met but wanted to meet or would like to have met, and why? Okay, so for me, I've kind of hinted at this before in the past, and that would be Lee Duncan. Now, who was Lee Duncan? Lee Duncan was Rin Tin Tin, the first dog during the silent period during the 20s. He died, supposedly was born in 1918. Rin Tin Tin died in 1932. And that dog is the greatest German Shepherd to ever have been on screen. In my opinion, there are some people who argue that Peter the Great was a dog who got shot and killed. Long story behind that. But Rin Tin Tin is still the number 1 action dog that's ever been filmed, and did stuff that nobody else has done. Lee Duncan did stuff with Rin Tin Tin that nobody else has ever done, and nobody's duplicated. One, they probably wouldn't let you try to do some of the things that he did because they were so dangerous. The stunts were so dangerous. And Lee Duncan, again, is doing this. I got to tell this to you millennials, sub-millennials. There weren't, of course, any sources of information other than doing it yourself, trial and error, and learning from other experts, and you had to pay your dues and go learn from them. There weren't schools, there weren't videos, there was no internet, of course. There weren't even books on the things that the movie guys were doing. There were no books. These guys wrote it. I mean, and Lee Duncan impressed and influenced everybody. I mean, he influenced. I know that Rudd, the grandfather to Robert, was impressed with Lee Duncan and thought highly of him. And Frank Inn said that nobody would have tried to do some of those things that he did with Rin Tin Tin, jumping from a moving railroad car into his arms, jumping in between two buildings on the two floors up, no net, no nothing, jumping in between this stuff, doing these crazy stunts that now they would have to set up all day to try to do the shot. And they would do these things. He would just do these things. And it's because of the bond that they had, number one, but also the training methods. All these people wanted to, 100 years later, and people were saying, well, we're going to do this and that. And look at these old methods. They don't work. These guys are capable of doing things with dogs that nobody, even to now, has ever replicated. And also, I mean, Rin Tin Tin was an incredible dog. This is like the first, second generation of German Shepherds. They're not what German Shepherds are now. There wasn't a working line and a normal line. No, German Shepherds were bred to be the dog that Rin Tin Tin was. He didn't get along with everybody. He tried to bite some of the actors, and some of the actors he did bite because that's what he was bred to do. He was a protective dog. He was a one-person dog. That's how all of these types of dogs are. There wasn't these No, they diluted German Shepherds and ruined them. He was from and you look at him. You look at that dog. Was a great-looking dog, and the female that he was with was an incredibly great-looking German Shepherd. I wish I could get hold of those as German Shepherds, but. Dobermans, they did the same thing too. Later in the 70s, they became incredibly popular. They were great dogs. Carl Miller was known as a Doberman trainer during that period of time, and I love Dobermans. I wanted Doberman. They're different than other dogs, but they've been destroyed in the United States. It's a pity they've been destroyed. And actually, and even the rough collies that Rudd Weatherwax made popular. They're not easy dogs to train. I'll put that out there. They're not border collies, people. Rough collies are not border collies. They're much bigger. They're more skittish. They're more suspicious than border collies are. They're not easy to train, but they made that dog. Rough collie was insanely popular dog, and they got bred into craziness. They did all sorts of things. When you start breeding for looks, people, you ruin dogs. So that's my added little thing to put in there, and that's why with my super dogs, Dutch Shepherd KNPV, which is not recognized by registries, thankfully he's not, because you're going to try, because they're great looking dogs, but you start breeding them because they look good and you want this certain look, you're going to ruin them, so I stay away from that whatsoever. Anyway, so there are my 5 answers. Replay it, and Robert, you ready to tackle these 5 questions? Give us your take on them.
Well, the first question about how I got into dog training is not really a question of getting into dog training as much as it is getting into me, right? Dog training getting into me. Because I, grew up an only child, and I had nothing but siblings who had 4 legs with hair and a tail and 2 pointy ears, many cases. So I really tried to emulate the dogs when I was younger, trying to figure out the way they thought, the things they thought about, the things that they did, why they did what they did. And, I really connected with them on almost a human level. And I sometimes I feel like there is a part of me that's, very much like a dog. The sleeping in silence thing. We talked about how, dogs like sound when they're alone, a ticking clock or music. It's kind of the same with me. I cannot sleep in complete silence. I don't know if that's because of my dog genes, but, I did grow up seeing Red Weatherwax and Frank Weatherwax training dogs. I never got to meet my great uncle Jack because he passed away when I was very young, and he was working for another company at the time, wasn't working for my grandfather. So, and of course, Mac, and I've seen, grew up around Frank Inn and Carl Miller and Teresa and William and Dennis and all these trainers who are mentioned in my book. So I would have to say, as far as how I got into it, it was kind of a natural progression. I like to tell the story about the things people used to ask me when I was a kid. They'd say, "So, are you going to be a dog trainer like your grandfather and your dad?" And I'm like, "Well, do I really have to make this decision? I'm only 6, right?" So yeah, a lot of the things, I felt a lot of pressure to emulate my dad and my grandfather when I was younger. And actually, as a teenager, if you would have asked me if I wanted to be a dog trainer, it would be the furthest thing from my mind, because I was so immersed in it. I felt like I really didn't have a choice. I was cleaning kennels for my parents, helping take care of my dad's business, and it was taking away from a lot of my own personal activities as a teenager. So I had a little stage there where I'd like, I'll do anything, I'll accept to be a dog trainer. But then when I went in the Navy and I was away from it for 4 years, I never realized how much I missed it. So that's how I ended up, being in dog training. And that's when I started working for my dad and subsequently worked on the new Lassie and the 95 movie. And a lot of working for a lot of other trainers in other movies that, like Carl Miller, Christophe mentioned him. Now, the second one, what's my biggest accomplishment with a dog? Well, there's a few categories for me. One of them is my greatest movie accomplishment. I think was training my dog Betty, to be the dog that my dad said she'd never amount to anything. And I still made her into a dog that was serviceable and that did movies and didn't have the right stuff to be a great movie dog, but I made her serviceable. And that's about the best I can say about Betty. She wasn't a great dog. She wasn't OJ. She wasn't, hey, I'm Lassie. She was just a big shaggy dog that didn't have a future, and I gave her one. I also had a dog named Phoenix about 10 years ago, a collie who I trained for a pilot I was trying to sell for the Animal Planet. I set up a demo reel. I had the dog working from 100 feet away, doing marks and speaking and doing all these commands from across the yard. And I just wish I had that dog today sometimes. Now, as far as behavioral modification, I fixed a lot of things. I fixed aggression. I fixed dogs that want to kill livestock. There's a lot of real problems, but there's so many that I fixed. I can't even really focus on one. So I guess I'll just go to my greatest dogs. And of course, Phoenix was my best trained dog, but Betty was my greatest accomplishment. Now, as far as the biggest mistake dog trainers make, I think a lot of it is overconfidence, for one, thinking that they know things that they don't know, because they trained a few dogs, that they know, what it takes to train any dog. The biggest mistake they make is training all dogs the same, for one, and also not being inconsistent with their training. In other words, teaching it a certain way and then actually executing it a different way. Everything evolves from the way you train the dog. So when the dog works, it's only an extension of the way you taught it. Just like when you use hand signals, it's an extension of the way you teach it. If you tell a dog to sit, you're making the motion that you're going to push their butt down into a sit position. And same with any, crawling, you're motioning with your fingers at the ground level to get them to crawl. So that's, you have to be consistent in all your training. And also you have to be sequential. You don't teach lie down before sit, because what happens is they'll start skipping the sit, going straight to the lie down. Everything has to be done in sequence. So I believe those are the biggest mistakes dog trainers make is deviating from the natural path of dog training. Now, what's the best advice I was given about dog training? Well, there was a couple. I'll give you advice from two of the greatest mentors in my life. Rudd's greatest advice was, you got to be smarter than the dog. In other words, what he meant is that you have to think the way the dog thinks. You have to put yourself in a position where you're already anticipating the loophole that the dog wants to create. A perfect example is dogs who don't go to the bathroom outside. It's like, hey, my dog doesn't go to the bathroom. He loves being outside, but he never goes to the bathroom. He waits till he goes in the house, and then he craps in the house. And I'm like, well, that's because the dog has already figured out that, and I ask him too, I say, you probably put the dog up right after they go to the bathroom, right? I said, yeah, I do. I say, well, there's your answer right there, because the dog has already figured out that his time outside will end if he poops in the yard. So he holds it so that he can get more time in the yard. But see, a lot of people don't think about that. They don't think about what the motive is for the dog, what the dog in his mind is trying to accomplish. What is his motivation? What is it that makes him do what he does? And I think it takes a little bit of insight, because there's a lot of possibilities you could think of. When I see a dog that behaves a certain way, I make an assumption based on experience that one of maybe 2 or 3 things have happened to this dog in their lifetime, and it's left a mark on their disposition. So, those are a lot of things that, as far as advice goes. And then my dad's always said that, when you work with dogs that are frightened, because I've worked with a lot of soft dogs in my life, and he used to say that the key to getting a dog over their fear is to make them more afraid of what you're going to do. Now, I don't, try to threaten dogs. That's not the way I train. And at the time, I didn't really understand what he meant. But now I realize that what he meant is, if there's a dog that is afraid of, say, a Frisbee, you might find another distraction to offset that distraction. So you're not saying, don't be afraid of that. You're saying, worry about this, don't worry about that. So you're giving them a choice. You're basically getting them to gravitate to the greater threat, as opposed to the threat that is abstract and off in the distance that really shouldn't be affecting them at all. So it's basically just drawing in everything towards you. It can be through an object, through a squeak toy, whatever it is that gets them more focused on you. And then Living or Dead, who's a dog trainer that you would have liked to have met. And I've met most of the living dog trainers and the ones that have passed in the last 10 years. As a young trainer working for a guy named Harry Lucani, right? Is that Lucani, I believe it's pronounced?
Yeah.
Lenay, I believe it's spelled. And he was an Army trainer, and he had a big influence on my grandfather. So I think that I would have wanted to meet him. And of course, Lee Duncan, who Christophe already mentioned. But I would have wanted to meet Harry the most, because he seemed like an interesting person. He had a background in military service training, and he had a big influence on the way my grandfather ended up training later on. And of course, it's almost like not just learning from the Jedi, but also talking to Yoda. And Larry Lucani was probably the Yoda of my world, of my Jedi family. So everybody learned from somebody. Nobody came out here and said, I'm a self-made dog trainer. Nobody taught me anything. Everything I learned on my own. And that's not true of any good trainer. And any trainer who doesn't give credit to the people who help them become great trainers is really, missing the whole purpose of dog training. Because what Christophe and I are trying to do is we're trying to pass on years and years of knowledge, decades of knowledge, so it doesn't get lost. I'm not saying that our methods are better necessarily. I'm saying that they're more proven. They've been proven over time. And they're also an option for a trainer who says, should I do it like this way, or should I do it like these guys do it? It just gives you an option. I didn't become the trainer I was until I worked for other people. My dad said, you're not going to appreciate the way I train until you work for other trainers. So I did. I worked for all these other trainers, Karen Dew and Paul Calabria and of course, Carl Miller, and a lot of trainers who a lot of people haven't really heard of, but people who not only, for example, Paul Calabria tutored under my great uncle Frank, and I've worked with him on various projects. And every person, even if it's the worst trainer that you've ever seen, you're going to learn mistakes that you don't want to make. So I think I've covered that. And I'll keep in mind that when we're talking about Harry Lucani, we're going back to 1987, silent movies.
Yeah. Well, hey.
The dog was. I'm sorry. Were you going to say something, Christophe?
Yeah. Let's talk about who he trained. The dogs that he trained. That's because
Well, I mean, he trained a number of dogs on the show. I don't know much about as far as his specific role working with service dogs, but I do know that he trained Petey some incredible things. And matter of fact, you talked about being able to switch the limp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was able to do cover the eye with the right paw, cover the eye with the left paw. He'd get the dog to cross with the left paw when he's lying down, cross with the right paw. He did everything interchangeably. So I feel like that was something that a lot of trainers don't know how to do. They only know how to get a dog to heel on the right side, or but they don't know how to set things up based on whatever need you may have. So there's going to be variations. And the fact that Harry was able to make everything interchangeable, and I know why he did that, because they did a lot of reversing of the film. One of the gags on the Our Gang family is they play it forward and they play it back. So when you saw the paw go left and then you saw it go back right and then you saw it go right and back to left, it was almost like it was a trick, like trick photography. But no, the dog just did it both ways. And I just thought that was incredible that he was able to have the foresight to anticipate, the director saying, hey, I want the right paw to cross the left, or not the left crossing the right. I want something untraditional. That's why, Christophe and I aren't big on the auto sit, because that's limiting you. It's limiting your options. Because we don't want anything to happen automatically. We want it to happen specifically for a reason, and have the versatility to do it a different way if necessary. And with that, I'm going to give it back to Christophe. I think I've covered our 5 questions, but because we want to answer those questions, all of the questions, and I know that what we're doing right now is really just scratching the surface. So I'll give it back to Christophe, and he can...
Okay. Yeah, so just for everyone, if they didn't catch that, the trainer he's talking about trained Buster. If you ever saw the shoes, Buster Brown, and they had the print added stuff, that dog is actually the same dog that was the very first Petey. He trained the very first Petey for Our Gang, also known as Little Rascals. This is
forgot about Buster Brown.
Yeah. So I want to throw that in there because that's one of the things that we have. We know the history of pretty much everything in film. At least I know. Obviously, Robert knows about his family, so I mean, if you're not going to find a Weatherwax historian that knows more than Robert. But as far as like Rin Tin Tin, a couple other people know as much as I do about Rin Tin Tin, his training, and what Lee Duncan did, Lee Duncan's life, everything involved, what other people said. Of course, we missed our chance with Frank Inn because Frank Inn did know him, and Rudd did too. I mean, that I would have had questions for them about him just because he was so influential on all of dogs. And but what I was going to say, back to Harry though, and so the things that he did with that dog, and I want to point out something here. I'm kind of, again, we always go on tangents, but this is a big deal. The greatest dogs, and I mean the greatest dogs that have been in film, are always singular dogs that the trainers had an incredible bond with. And that was Rin Tin Tin. Lee Duncan lived with that dog, and I mean lived for that dog. And he never thought past the first Rin Tin Tin. And he did incredible things with that dog that have been replicated, like I said. And the same thing with Harry. His son, in a film documentary about him, it said, that was our only dog, Petey. That was our only dog. And my dad had him doing incredible things because he was our only dog. And Rudd, with Pal, when Pal hit, he devoted almost all of his time with Pal. The other trainers worked with the other dogs, but, and he went around with Pal everywhere. Lassie, as everyone else would know him. So it's this incredible connection that is responsible with incredible trainers, but also incredible dogs, because these are once in a lifetime type of dogs. They can do things that normal dogs will never be able to do, as Robert was talking about, that he had with Betty. Betty was a great actor, a great dog actor, but wasn't up there at the same level as, say, OJ, which was his dog, the dog that his dad thought was his best dog that he ever had. I just want to throw that out there because when people think about dog training, it comes down to a lifestyle. And if you're not going to take in the lifestyle, meaning the canines become everything, then you're not going to get to the highest levels. And that's something, Roberts realized that he had an addiction when he was in the Navy, and it was to the dogs. So I just want to throw that out there because there's a lot to learn from our podcast. And you may not pick it up the first time, but if you go back and as people get better and better at dog training, they'll realize what we're talking about. They'll pick up some nuances that they didn't get the first couple of times. And they'll also look at our work and they'll say, man, that's a lot harder than I thought it was, because we're trying to make dogs look natural. That's why we don't do an automatic sit. It's stupid. It's also why I don't have a dog. It's not tactical either. I don't want a dog to stop in front of me on the recall. I want him to go to the sides or the middle. Why would I want him to stop in the front? That's just ridiculous. It's some sort of contrived sport nonsense. So the dogs wouldn't do that in real life. So for film dogs, we want them to look natural. We want them to do things that dogs would naturally do. They don't move artificially and stuff. And I want tactical dogs to move in ways that save their energy, that don't expend energy and just look stupid. As you get better at training, you'll see that what we're doing is much harder than what people think, and that's part of the deal. We're trying to make it look easy. I mean, that's the whole thing. That's the thing when people look at film dogs, they don't realize how difficult it is to do that. The trained dogs that do that, they don't know how difficult it is to have a dog who's never worked with this human before, hang out with that human, walk with that human, stop, sit, and hang out. Anyway, so I'm going to throw that in there as an added bonus to this podcast. If Robert, you got any comments there, I'll let you end it. You got
well, I'm just going to say the thing that we want to increase viewership with the show. So I guess I'll be saying what Christophe's already thinking, and that's that. Please participate. Don't think that there's any questions that are too mundane or minute to point out in your comments when you watch the show. And we want you to keep liking and keep subscribing to our channel so that we can continue to produce and provide quality information regarding dog training. Because we can't do it without you, and we can't do it without each other, because together is what makes the show great. And I'm really happy to be working with Christophe. And I think that, when he reviewed my book, about a year ago now, it was probably the best thing that ever happened, because if it had not been for that, I would not have the opportunity to work with him now. So thank you, Christophe, and I'll let you wrap things up.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of a mutual admiration thing. Robert's a professional, and I don't mean that in the generic sense. I mean, he's a true professional, and he's done things that most dog trainers cannot do. They can't do it. So, and it's on film, and you can see it. And the things, it's incredible. And if you're not availing yourself of our 100 years combined knowledge and experience, operational with all sorts of dogs, for me, from the Arctic to the jungle, dogs that are not artificially bred, real jungle dogs, stuff like that, then you must not care about dogs. Because if you want to go learn how to train gerbils or basset hounds, there are plenty. Most people can't train a basset hound. That's why it's kind of an oxymoron. But there are a lot of people. But if you really want to know about dog training, it's us. And we make no apology. I make no apologies for that fact. And it's great working with Robert. We got a lot of things planned in the future, and we're going to get merch, at some point. But anyway, we'll see everybody in the next podcast, and maybe sooner if you want your dog trained by either one of us.